So I guess, you know, how I've been doing this is really just to kind of let you begin wherever you'd like, you know, on the day that this happened. I know that it was the day after your first child was born, I guess.
Right, it was actually 3 days after. She was born on the 25th of November, so it was the first day that I was back at work. So I hadn't actually been to the restaurant before that evening. So I stopped in just to grab a cup of coffee. I was on my way to the gym, which was a typical routine that I did. I would stop. I usually opened every morning and then would go in. I would leave in the afternoon, then go in like early evening at some point, get a cup of coffee, check in, make sure everything was good, and then, you know, go to the gym and work out. And then sometimes I would stop back.
How long had you had your cafe at this point?
I think I was there, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or so.
Okay. So you were pretty established in the neighborhood as
Right.
a business owner. And
right. I'm trying to think, in 2005. I'd been there about 2 years, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was established. People knew who I was. I was really active in the neighborhood. I was on the board at Northeast Shores. I was in the Euclid Chamber. And I was active in we lived in the neighborhood, and I was active in the beach club. So there was a lot of people knew who I was. I was pretty well known in the community because I was really involved, which actually worked out to my favor in this incident. Things may have looked very different had I not been who I was. Mm-hmm. But I went in to get a cup of coffee. I parked in front of the cafe, and in front of the cafe on 185th, I petitioned actually to have a sign put up that said 15-minute parking from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. to allow people to be able to come and go and get their coffee and then leave. And this was about 7 o'clock on Monday night. So it was beyond that. Well, I parked right behind the sign. And when I came out, there was a police officer behind my car. And he had his lights on, but there was obviously, he wasn't pulling anybody over. I assumed I was parked legally. So I get in my car, and I leave, and he like, you know, immediately turns on his siren and pulls me over. So like literally I get to the next intersection, like just to the other side of the intersection. So I was on the corner of LaSalle and East 185th. So I get just to the other side of the intersection, and he comes over to the car, and he like throws a ticket at me. He's like, "Here, I was in the process of filling this out when you were moving away." So I look at the ticket, and I'm like, it doesn't really say what the ticket's for. It just shows that there's a ticket, parking ticket. And I'm like, well, I was parked legally, so I can't imagine why he's giving me a parking ticket. So I get out of the car, and I said, "Hey," I was like, "I got a question for you." And he's like, "What?" And I said, "You know, what is this? You know, I don't know what this ticket's for." And he says, "You're parked illegally." And I was like, so I start walking towards the sign because I'm going to show him like the sign. I'm like, "No, I'm parked legally. I can park here." He says, "No, you're parked too close to the intersection." I said, "How can I be parked too close to the intersection?" Because I was like, "There's a sign here that says I can park here." You know, and he's like, "Just get back in your car." I'm like, "I'm just asking a legitimate question." You know, he's like, "Put your hands up against the car," and I'm like, "No." I'm like, "I'm not putting my hands up against the car. I haven't done anything. I'm just asking you a question about, you know, this parking ticket." And he's like, "Put your hands up against the car." I'm like, "For what?" I'm like, "Well, I haven't done anything." He's like, "You're assaulting me." And then he grabbed me and threw me against the car and attempted to put handcuffs on me, but I slipped out of my shirt that I was wearing. I had a fleece on with the t-shirt on under it, and both the fleece and the t-shirt came off. And I ran inside the restaurant.
Why did you do that?
I didn't know what to do. I was just like, there was nobody on the street that I could see. I was like, so what am I going to do? Right. You know, I was like, I'm going to go get help, you know, because this guy's like crazy. You know, I started like screaming, you know, like for help or whatever, but there was nobody there, obviously. It was like a quick struggle. I mean, it happened pretty fast. But then I run inside the restaurant. The door closes because it's like on a plunger. So when he went to open the door, he actually tripped and fell, and then got up, came inside, and, you know, I ran inside, was like, you know, call the police, not thinking about the fact that
that's ironic
that more
he is the police,
that like more police are going to come.
Right.
So Anyway, I'm not wearing a shirt, so he grabs me by my throat.
Are there people in the coffee shop?
Yeah, the place is full. There's probably about 20 people in the place at the time. And there were maybe 2 or 3 people working behind the counter. So the manager that night, I remember, like I can still picture the look on her face when it happened. So anyway, he grabbed me by my throat and threw me down to the ground. I tried to get back up, and he cracked me in the back of my head with his flashlight. And then I got back up again, and he threw me into, there were shelves of like retail, like coffee mugs and things that were for sale, threw me into the shelf of coffee mugs, and there was like glass everywhere, and then he cracked me over the head, in front of my head, so I was bleeding at that point. And then pinned me to the ground, like kneeled on my legs, and like was like strangling me essentially.
With his hands around your
with
neck.
his hands around my neck. Until the other police officers came, and I don't know how long that was, maybe a minute or so. I mean, because they came pretty quick, it seemed like. And then they put handcuffs on me, and they put them on so tight that like I like just kept asking them to loosen them. You know, I'm like, I have no clue what's going on. I'm like, I'm completely disoriented, and they assume that like I'm on drugs or something. So they just assume like, because the other police officers really don't know what happened. So they apprehend me. They put me in an ambulance because I'm bleeding profusely because they cracked my head open in the front. And they take a blood sample from me, which I didn't ever agree to, which I really didn't understand how they could do that. But I guess maybe that's the law. I'm really not sure. I never looked into it. But they took a blood sample, assuming that they were going to find drugs in my system, but I don't use drugs, so that was obviously not the case. And I sit in the ambulance for a while, and handcuffs still on, and then they take me to...
Were you being treated in the ambulance?
They like tried to clean up the cut or whatever. They're like, you're going to have to go to the hospital. So they... I sit in the ambulance for what seems like a really long time. I can hear things going on outside. I can hear my my ex-wife now out there. I can hear like things going because there's just a lot of commotion. I could hear some of my employees, and like there's just like the neighborhood was like, you know, they were all outside because nobody could really. People, you know what happens when there's like a commotion. People want to come out and see what's happening, and people were just in such shock, you know, that this happened. I mean, it's just like it started with a parking ticket, you know, and then ended up in, you know, me getting, you know, beat pretty badly. So they take me to Euclid Hospital, which is at the top of 185th and Lakeshore, and I was there being treated. They put some staples in my head. They didn't do any CAT scans or any MRIs or anything. And then I'm there talking to the police officers, and I asked if I can have a phone call. So they wouldn't let me have the phone call right away. They like made me like wait until like the absolute last minute, and then they allowed me to call, and I think I called my wife and let her know like where I was and what was happening. And I assumed that that I was just like, I didn't even know what was happening. I didn't know what I was being charged with at this point. So I'm in the...
How were you feeling at that point?
I mean, I just was disoriented. I just remember thinking like I just couldn't wait to get out of the emergency room. You know, my head was hurting. You know, my wrists were hurting. You know, I was laying in a, you know, on like a gurney that they had like rolled me in from the ambulance. And I just remember feeling like really like disoriented and stressed out. But assuming that like I was just gonna go home afterwards, like I didn't really know, you know, what was happening, or that maybe I would go to the local precinct, you know, on 152nd. They would like do some paperwork, and then I would go home. But then he's like, no. I asked the police officer. I said, you know, what's the plan? I was like, when do I get to go home? He's like, home? He's like, you're not going home. He's like, you're charged with a felony.
Was this the same officer who
No, this is a different. This is a different officer. That officer was gone. And he's like, you're charged with a felony. I'm a felony. I'm like, for what? He's like, felonious assault on a police officer. I'm like, I never touched the police officer. You know, I'm like, so like this is like really confusing. And then I found out that I was also charged with failure to comply and resisting arrest, which were both misdemeanors. And then also the parking ticket as well. So I had 4 charges against me, essentially, for like that happened within like 5 or 10 minutes worth of time. So
Sorry, can we pause for 1 second? I'm going to shut off.
I should make sure that my phone's off too. Yeah, it is.
I sometimes mention that, and I forgot to.
Just edit that part out. Sorry, John.
That's okay. So so that's like news to me. That's the moment that I found out that like I didn't realize the magnitude of what was happening. So Euclid Hospital releases me. They put me back into the car, and I remember like just begging them to like loosen the handcuffs because the handcuffs were still so tight that like it was just like the pain was just like my hands were actually numb at that point. And they said no. And I hear them calling in that they're taking me downtown. So I thought that I was going to the local precinct, but then I found out that I'm going downtown.
Were your hands
to,
cuffed in front?
No, they were cuffed in back. You know, so it's like I felt very claustrophobic, you know, because it's like I didn't have, you know, access to my hands. So they put me in the car. I'm sitting in the car, and I remember then we had to stop on the way on Lakeshore because there was some sort of a shooting. So I'm like in the car, and I'm like trying to duck down because they're stopping because there's like some armed suspect in the area that they're like trying to like track down. And I'm in the back of the car, just like not even knowing what's happening, thinking about the fact that my wife is at home with this newborn child, you know, and you know, wondering if like when I'm going to see them again. They take me downtown, and I hear them call it in, like, we've got a white. You know, as if like, you know, just like the way that they like say it, just like you're like some kind of animal or something. I get downtown, and you know, I just comply with like whatever that is they want me to do. They take mug shots, and I'm like watching, like as people are coming in to be processed, and like the way they're treating them, they're like throwing people around, and I'm just like horrified. I'm like I couldn't even believe like what I was seeing, and I think that you know, some of the other people that were being held kind of looked at me. Like I probably looked off because my head was completely wrapped in bandages and stuff, so I probably didn't look like I was, you know, all there or whatever. But I was just like kind of like taking it all in, and just like I was just watching how they were treating these people, and I was just appalled. I couldn't believe, you know, that, you know, I don't care what happens. Like, you have no right to treat people as if they're not human. I mean, these people may be criminals. They may have committed, you know, heinous crimes, but they're still human beings. And that was like the first thing that I remember noticing. So they put me in a cell by myself because I was white, and primarily most of the people that were in there were black or Latino, it seemed like. So I ended up having a cell to myself. They put me in the cell, and I'm just like appalled at how dirty it is. I mean, the place was like crawling with roaches. I didn't want to touch anything, but there were like roaches crawling all over the walls, and I was just like, they put me in a suicide suit. So that because I didn't have any clothes on when I went there, so all this time I had no shirt on. So like I was cold, like in the hospital, in the car.
What time of year this was?
This was November.
How was the weather?
It was balmy that night, but then it like quickly got cold. And I remember when I left the next day that it was like really cold. I remember
was it
like
cold in the cell?
It was cold as hell, yeah. But they gave me a suicide suit or whatever. It's like basically a paper.
They took your shoes.
Clothes, yeah. They took my clothes. They gave me like a paper suit to put on, and I had that. But I remember just like laying there and like not knowing what was going on, asking them for ibuprofen because my head hurt so bad.
Did they give you anything?
They did not. They eventually, the next day, I think they let me see a nurse. And they did give me some ibuprofen, but I probably shouldn't have been taking anything because I didn't realize that there was probably more complications with my head than what I knew at the time. You know, I actually physically at that point didn't feel all that bad, considering like what I had just been through. But I remember just watching. I remember the guy across the street or across the cell. He was like not all there, and he kept saying, you know, they're gonna keep us here till Christmas. And I just remember like just taking this all in, and I'm just like, what do you mean they're gonna keep us here till Christmas? You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm just not knowing what's going on. I've never been in a situation like this. Like this is just completely foreign to me. I just am like in, you know, utter shock. And for me, to be locked up is just like there's like nothing worse than to like not have your freedom. So I'm in this cell, and I'm just trying to make the best of it and try not to think about it and try not to touch anything. And then I remember like slide some food under the cell, and I'm just like waiting to like I can maybe call somebody. And
How long were you there?
I was there for a day, like about 24 hours. I think I was there. But that evening, Dan Chaplin showed up, and as did his daughter, who they're both attorneys, but she worked with me at the Arabica, and
Was she there when it happened?
she wasn't, but she and I were good friends, and she actually she was like taking the bar exam, so she wasn't actually a practicing attorney, so she had just finished school, so she was kind of working in the interim between when she started practicing, and so that worked to my favor. I you like never think about, you know, those kinds of things, like the friends that you make when you make them. But anyway, they showed up and they're like, well, we're gonna take care of this. The next day, you know, they allowed me to see a nurse, and they allowed me to make a phone call. So I call my wife and just check in on her, and I'm not sure like how long I'm going to be there. I know that they can keep me 3 days, but basically what they told me, what Dan had told me, is that they can keep you as long as they want because of the Patriot Act. So yes, it's 3 days, but because of the Patriot Act, they can just hold you indefinitely if they want to. And obviously, the police were trying to protect themselves because they were posturing to stand up for Christopher Graham. So anyway, they the next day, Brian Friedman from the Northeast Shores Development Corporation came and saw me, and he's like, you know, we're getting the councilman on this. We're like, you know, we're doing what we need to do to find out what's going on. And it occurs to me like that, like if I didn't know these people, that I probably would have been, like that I could be there a lot longer than I actually was. And I was fortunate to get out 24 hours later. I was able to get a bond.
How were the jail guards treating you while you were there?
The jail guards were fine, with me, but I was just really compliant. I just did what I needed to do. You know, I remember asking if I could, you know, go see the nurse, and then I would like use like another. I remember like wanting to use another bathroom, just because I didn't want to have to. You know, the place was just so gross. I can't even like. It was like beyond. I couldn't even believe that they hold people like that. And I remember years ago I was on the grand jury, and I was living in Geauga County at the time. So I was on the grand jury, and like one of the jobs when you're on the grand jury is that you tour the jail facility. And I remember thinking that at that time in Geauga County that the jail seemed like it wasn't in like the best condition, and they were attempting to build new. There was a movement afoot to get a new jail built in Geauga County, and they did actually build a new jail. But I remember thinking like these people, like they looked like they actually had it pretty good, and I felt even then that the conditions weren't all that great. But like when I walked into this place, I just couldn't believe how gross it was. And after I'd toured that, you know, several years earlier, my view had changed.
By comparison,
right,
it would have been
right,
a little easier out
right,
of Geauga County.
Right. So anyway, but I remember like thinking about that, like at the time, like because it's like I said, you just like I never expected this. So anyway, I get out the next day, and you know, I think that I'm feeling okay. I'm back to normal. I go back to work, and then I start having like all these dizzy spells, and I'm not knowing like really what's going on. I'm like, you know what's up. So I go back to I think I went to the emergency room. I went to Hillcrest this time, and they admit me. They do a CAT scan, and they find that I have bleeding in the brain. So they hold me for a couple of days, and so they run a bunch of multiple tests, and then find out that like I'm not actually bleeding, but it was bruising, and but it was gonna heal. It would be all right. So they released me, and then I still think I'm okay. But then about a week later, when I don't know what happened, but I just started feeling like really sick. And I just like felt like really ill for like months, probably like during the process. Like during the process, I lost probably about like 20 or 30 pounds. And I wasn't really overweight, so I didn't really have much to lose at that point. But I just like I found it like increasingly difficult to function in society. Like I was afraid to leave my house. My ex-wife was afraid to leave the house. You know, we would like double lock the doors. We would keep the curtains closed. My daughter was only a few days old when this happened, so she actually, like a month or two into her life, wasn't like really thriving because she was, you know, relying on her mother for breast milk, but her mother was depressed, as was I, so it was just really difficult to like just go on with life, essentially. And
so the physical illness that you were feeling was stemming from anxiety.
Right. And I didn't even realize that at the time. I had never really experienced anxiety before. And, you know, I went through the court, and, you know, I went, they put my case up against the grand jury twice, and I wasn't indicted, which is pretty rare. I know I was on the grand jury, and we indicted pretty much every case. Because you have a prosecutor there telling you they're going to get a fair trial. They're going to get a fair trial. I don't know, you know, what providence was shining on me that I did not get indicted, but I didn't get indicted, so I didn't have to go through that process. But I did. I didn't go to the federal court, but they did get pushed back down to the city court as misdemeanors. So then I did have to go through that whole process. I actually pled to the failure to comply, I think it was, just because that's what the attorney instructed me to do, because he felt that it wasn't at the time, I was still waiting for the federal indictment, so he's like, let's just get this out of the way. He's like, let's not like fight this in the wrong arena. So I pled to that, and it ended up that all the charges were dropped, essentially. It took probably about 7 months for all that to happen, so for months I was like pretty freaked out. I would just like remember laying in bed at night just praying that I was going to be able to like go on with my life, that I wasn't going to lose my business, that I was going to see my daughter grow up, and, you know.
So on top of the social anxiety that you were experiencing was this, you know, parallel, you know.
Right, this pending like legal matter that I didn't know what was going to happen with. And then eventually, you know, several months later, everything was dropped. And, you know, but then even after that, you know that there's a statute of limitation, that, you know, they tell you that if there's any new evidence that comes up that they could reopen the case. And like, it's really twisted because I know that I didn't do anything, but when you're treated that way, it's like I didn't trust anybody.
Yeah.
I was like, they actually, to get some, they convinced somebody there was actually a witness that happened to be there at the time. And the person had a bunch of charges against them.
A witness to what happened on the street.
And he, was a heroin addict and had a bunch of charges against him. And they dropped his charges so that he would, basically, say that I, was in the wrong or whatever. And it ended up that his, testimony wasn't credible. So it ended up, not mattering in the end, but just the fact that they were like willing to drop the charges for this man. And then, as time went on, I learned more about the story about, the officer. So it like really freaked me out. I was afraid, so even after all the charges were dropped, I was still afraid that there might be retaliation from this officer or the police. And like I said earlier, that I had some robberies and burglaries after this incident, and I know at the coffee shop that, and prior to that there were none. So I just found that rather curious that that happened. Police officers that frequented my business stopped coming in. I felt alienated by some members of the community because people that were friends of police officers or firemen, they decided that they were going to stop coming into the business or just like cut me off. And I just felt like I always had to like prove that like I was innocent, but like how do you prove this when most people just always want to side with the police?
Did people ask you frequently about the case?
All the time. I felt like I couldn't go anywhere. I actually frankly I just didn't want to leave my house most of the time. I would go to work. Sometimes I would go for a couple hours, but I couldn't stay very long because I would have issues breathing. I would have I would shake and convulse. I was always afraid that I was going to have seizures and things like that because they warned me that that could happen because I had such a severe head injury. I was really it really changed me. There was a point in my life where there was before this incident, there was after this incident, and I feel that I've become more compassionate because of this incident to other people. than I was prior, just because it occurred to me at that point that you could be innocent, and you could be charged guilty very easily.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't have all the connections that I had in the community, if I didn't have access to the money for, for bail, for attorney, because I had to front that money. It's not like, to retain an attorney, it's you have to come up with money. So if I didn't have access to those things, it could have gone very differently. And I recognize that, and I'm grateful for that every day. But there's a lot of people that don't have that. They don't have that luxury. And I think that the officer didn't know who I was. He just thought that it was probably just a patron coming out. Had he known, because I remember when they were like putting me into the ambulance, like one of the officers, it's like, oh wait, that's the owner of the business? And then I heard like one of the other guys say, oh, he must have been on drugs or something, But nobody really knew what happened.
The officers who showed up, were they called by one of your employees?
I don't know.
Or, okay, so you don't know if the officer called for backup?
He probably, I'm guessing he probably called for backup,
Okay.
but in the moment, like there was so much happening, I really don't know. But I just remember like the faces of the people. Like there was one woman, I remember she was sitting, because when you came into the coffee shop, there was like a stage that served as like a seating area during the week, but on the weekends we would have live entertainment. But I remember like just the look on her face, just like she was just like, and like I can just only imagine. And I remember like noticing like a month later that there was like blood splattered like all over like the door frame, because it had like sprayed up.
Oh my God.
As they were like pulling me out, and I was just like, oh my God.
You said that you kept the clothes that you were wearing for a long time.
Yeah, I kept them because they told me my attorney like said you should keep these because it was like really the only evidence that I had.
They were bloody
but they were
too.
bloody, they were ripped. The neck of the shirt was just completely like stretched out from when he like when I slipped out of the clothes, my pants were ripped. It was crazy. It's like I can't even. And I've worked over the years to like put it behind me. I went through a lot of therapy. I did a lot of like meditation work, and I ended up actually eventually having to take like an antidepressant type medication. That was what I think actually set me straight eventually. I did that actually years later. Because I was really resistant to it. But I took it for a couple of years, and it kind of evened me out. I moved away, which helped, I think, because I was out of the situation. I didn't have to look at the scene of the incident every day.
Your decision to move away was because it was too difficult to overcome it?
It was, yeah, I mean, that definitely, helped.
You left the state?
I left the state, yeah, I moved to Oregon, actually, for a couple of years, and, I just felt that I was never going to escape it. Like, I felt there was a stigma against me. I felt that there was, like, just a bad, every time I walked into my business, I just I think that was the scene of the crime. I could still like see myself on the floor. I would see, you know what I mean? It just never went away. It just was like, it was always there.
So then you returned from Oregon.
And then I returned from Oregon.
Why did you come back?
Because I moved to Oregon and never actually came back to Cleveland while I was there. And after being there for a couple of years, I just felt like I was kind of homesick. I'd missed my family. Some family had come to visit while we were out there, but we just felt that maybe it was, we should move back. I felt there was more opportunity here in some ways because real estate's cheaper and things like that. But I came back and like the day after I moved back, and like it was like a big move. I mean, I had 2 children. I was married, so it was a pretty big deal to pick up and move back across the country. And I just remember driving. I took a drive down 185th. And I remember just getting this sinking feeling that I like went down Lakeshore, and I just remember like feeling like, oh my God, I made a really bad mistake. I never should have came back here.
It was the post-traumatic stress that was...
Right, it like had returned.
Yeah.
Because like at that point I had like been on antidepressants. I'd been off antidepressants for well over a year at that point. Like I felt that I felt like really solid, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm not over this. It's never going to go away.
Yeah.
So after that, I decided to. I talked to my wife at the time. I was still married, And we talked about, what our options were. We talked about maybe actually going back to Oregon, and then decided that we would look at Asheville, North Carolina, because it was closer, so we could come back and visit when we wanted to. But, so we pursued that. I was here for probably about 9 months. I actually was the chef at the Beachland Ballroom. I did that for a little under a year, and then found a job in North Carolina and moved down there. And actually the only reason I came back is because while I was in North Carolina, my ex-wife and I split up, and we just felt that it would be better to move back here because we had family support. And it's just very difficult, I think, for us to co-parent without that kind of support. So we ended up coming back for that reason. And it was actually very difficult for me for the first year. I've been back now for about a year and a half. And the first year was really rough. And I think that it's getting easier because I've just learned to accept it, and I've really moved on with my life. But it definitely has changed me. I also have I believe it's from the incident that I have like a difficulty sometimes like putting my thoughts together. There seems to be like a slight disconnect. Like I've noticed that, and I'm guessing it's probably, I had a lump on the back of my head that was pretty severe, and I obviously had some bruising in the brain. So I'm sure that, I'm lucky that it wasn't worse than it is, but it definitely affected me physically and emotionally, and it's something that I'm going to live with for the rest of my life. I know that I can't go back and change it, but it's definitely changed my perspective. And like I said, I've become more compassionate towards other people that are, have had this happen.
How has it changed the way you view police?
I know that I was pulled over like not actually all that long after the incident. It was maybe about a year after the incident. I remember I called, I picked up the phone. I called my ex-wife. I said, I'm just going to put you on the phone. I'm going to set the phone on the seat just so you can hear what happened, just in case. And it was like a completely benign incident. It was like, I don't remember what it was, but they ended up not giving me a ticket. They pulled me over. I think it was to check my license or something.
Was it a Cleveland officer?
It was actually Euclid, but it was on 185th Street, so I wasn't sure. I just saw the lights go up, and I just pulled over. But for years afterwards, every time I saw police lights, that's where my mind would go. And my view of police, I know that there's good people and there's bad people. Actually, there were 2 officers that behind closed doors, they slipped me some papers and said, "This is what you need to do." I actually found the letters. I actually found the letters today from the officers. One was a commander, and one was a former officer for the city, and they gave me all the information. I sat down, and I think that may have had something to do with the way things went, maybe. I don't know.
So they were advising you on how to...
Right. And I was almost I was actually really apprehensive because I didn't trust them. You know what I mean? I was not, but I felt that I had to trust, I had to take a chance because of what do I have to lose?
Right. So was that redeeming in your eyes?
It was, and I know that not every police officer is bad. I mean,
intellectually you know that, but...
Right, but it's there's still that, in the back of my mind, I remember what happened and how I felt very alienated and how they all banded together.
Oh, yeah.
And people that, because the police officers, we offered them, basically I gave them free coffee every day. So they were regulars in my business, and all of a sudden they stopped coming. There were a few that actually did keep coming, but most of them just stopped. And it just occurred to me, wow, it's a brotherhood, and they stick up for each other no matter what. And the magnitude of the corruption was really apparent. I knew from my experience with just trying to open a business in the city how dysfunctional the city was, and that did not ease my mind at all during the process, because the city of Cleveland just, it's just, in that time, Cuyahoga County was still, filled with corruption. It's just I didn't trust anybody. Now I feel things are coming out with, everything that happened, with the
Department of Justice.
Right, with, DeMora and Russo and all that, and everything that happened with, that has happened now with, the vetting of, the department, the police department. It makes me feel a little bit better, but, and I just hope that going forward that things really do change. And what really struck me is that Tamir Rice shooting, that I actually, when it happened, I heard about it. We were actually I think we were out of town. I want to say we were in Asheville. I want to say it happened around Thanksgiving because I was out of town when the shooting happened. I remember thinking that, or maybe when the video came out, I was out of town because we had gone out of town for the holiday. And I remember hearing about it, and I remember saying, like, there's no police officer that could shoot a child and not feel bad about it. Like, there's no way he did that on purpose. Like, there had to be some sort of a struggle. And then when I saw the video, and, like, they basically pull up and shoot a 12-year-old boy, like, it was just, like my heart and my, just, like, sunk. And I was like, I couldn't believe that. It was just, like, that could be anybody's child. And the training, something has to change with the way these people are trained to apprehend people. You can't assume that because somebody has a gun or a knife, or that they just might because they get out of their car, or that they're dangerous. There's got to be a better way to apprehend people than to just use, like, deadly force. Or, I mean, I'm lucky that he didn't pull out his gun that night and try to shoot me when I was running. I mean, I didn't, none of that was running through my head at that moment, but, like, in retrospect, when I think back, he could have shot me. He could have tased me, he could have shot me, who knows what he could have done. I mean, I'm probably lucky that he just beat me. But
he did break your head open.
He did. But I mean, I'm probably lucky that that's all it was. And that I function, in society, and I've moved on with my life, and I, basically, was vindicated of everything. So, like, it could have gone a different way. If I were a different person, it very well could have gone the way. Like I said, I had the luxury.
Yeah. The Justice Department's report, you probably read all about what it contains, and that's why we're looking at all of these lawsuits, sort of the 10 years that led up to these findings that the federal government has issued. They're saying that there are systemic failures within the police department, and the mayor is saying that there are just a few bad cops, and that they have to weed those out, and then everything will be okay. You kind of seem like you believe that there are good officers and bad, but that there are also systemic problems.
There are definitely systemic problems. The system is corrupt. The internal investigation was BS, because they don't. That was basically, I asked that there be an internal investigation, and they just basically move cops to desk duty. They don't actually get to the root of the problem, and the root of the problem is the training. That the cops are not, just like in the Timothy Rice shooting, there was a young cop. That's a training issue, because I'm sure nobody wants to shoot, I would hope, a child or anybody for that matter. And if you are shooting somebody, why are you shooting them in the stomach or the chest? Like, that makes no sense either. So that to me is a training issue, and there's definitely a systemic problem, and it's a brotherhood, and they look out for each other. Even because the good cops, are forced to look out for the bad cops, because it's they all rely on each other, and I feel that the part of the problem is that police officers are hired to, in the city of Cleveland. They're not residents a lot of times of the city of Cleveland, so it's like as if they're coming into a war zone. That's the way they view it. And if you're not part of the community, how can you police that community objectively? Because it's not your community. So you come into the jungle, basically, and it's a war zone, and you're just there to keep order and protect yourself. Are you really looking out for the residents of the city? I don't know. And at that time, the time that this happened to me, there was a residency law in the city of Cleveland. So those people were all residents of the city of Cleveland at the time. Hypothetically, because a lot of people would keep homes in the city and not actually live in the city. So, but I do feel that if you are a member of the community, that you're more likely to. Right.
That war zone mentality was something that the Justice Department also picked up on,
right,
and noted that it's this us versus them mentality, and that it really thwarts community policing efforts, right, and becoming part of the community. And
right.
Yeah. Why did you return to this neighborhood? given that this is the place where it happened?
Right. Well, it just turns out that this is where my connections were because I lived in this neighborhood for a long time. You know, I know the owner here. She actually lived 3 doors down, three doors behind my coffee shop, so she was in there every morning. So we knew each other for a long time. So that's how, I mean, twice actually I returned to this neighborhood. And the first time it was because I you know, took a job at the Beach and Ballroom. It's funny because I actually had another opportunity in Moreland Hills at another restaurant that I could have taken that I didn't take. And I ended up coming back to this neighborhood because I felt like my people were here. You know, I know people. There's a lot of really good people in this community. You know, and I like it down here by the lake. I don't actually live down here now, but I work down here, and I still love the community.
Do you feel more comfortable generally not living here? I mean, do you feel comfortable having, you know, working here but living elsewhere?
Yeah, I feel like I felt for a long time reluctant to even live in the city of Cleveland. Now that would, you know, I don't feel that so much because it's been so long. I've been able to, I think, put things in the proper perspective for the most part. You know, but there still is in the back of my mind. It resides there. You know, that the apprehension. But I just know that, like, I have to move on. You know, some of it. There's a lot of good police officers, and I try not to, like, focus on the bad. I try to focus on the good. And there are some bad seeds. There's a systemic problem, but I'm hoping it's being addressed at this point. You know, and that's, like, I guess where my hope is that, you know, it's not just happening in Cleveland, it's happening all over the place. When I was in Portland, it was a very similar situation. There was a lot of press surrounding the use of excessive force by the police officers there. So it's not just here, and it's evident in, you know, Ferguson and New York, and I mean that things are being addressed. I think it's just a really interesting time politically. I'm curious to see what's going to actually happen, because it's important that, you know, the general public respects, you know, the police officers, and because we need to have, you know, you need to have order in a community, but there also needs to be respect. I'm interested to see what's going to happen, and I hope that means that there's going to be a different type of training going forward, so that police officers know that the use of deadly or dangerous force is not, you know, even what they consider like tasing, like that's not something to be, you know, I wouldn't want to be tased. Right. You know, anybody who's like, you know, been slightly shocked, you know, like you know, like putting in a light. I remember once when I was a child getting like shocked. Like I can only imagine like what it's like to be tased. Oh yeah. You know, so I think that maybe that's, you know, that is where it's. I'm hoping that's where it's going to go. Is that there's going to be better training, and you know, I just hope that there's more of a like a general, I don't know, like what I'm looking for, but like that there's a better understanding of respect for all individuals on both sides, you know. So we'll see what happens. I don't know.